Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
La Tribuna Hispana USA es el periódico para los que leemos en español. En circulación desde 1988 en Long Island y New York City. Contamos con diferentes ediciones por zonas, impresas y digitales, donde usted puede leer las últimas noticias nacionales, internacionales y publicar sus anuncios para la comunidad. Atención empresarios, comerciantes y profesionales, si usted desea aumentar sus ventas, llame ahora mismo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 4, o visítenos en el www.latribunahispana.com.
Tribuna TV, 24 horas al día, 7 días a la semana, 365 días al año. Un mundo de información para ti, al alcance de tu dedo.
Escucha Tribuna Radio las 24 horas del día. Tribuna Radio desde cualquier lugar del mundo. Tribuna Radio en el www.tribunaradio.us. Tribuna Radio, la música que quieres escuchar. Tribuna Radio, la mejor programación. Tribuna Radio, programas de entrevistas. Para más información, llámanos al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 5, o escríbenos a sales@tribunaradio.us.
¿Te perdiste tu programa favorito en Tribuna TV? Esto no volverá a pasar porque ahora te presentamos videos on demand. Cualquier día, a cualquier hora y en cualquier lugar. Visita nuestra sección Videos on Demand en nuestra página web o en nuestras aplicaciones para Android y iPhone. Entra al nombre del programa que quieres ver, elígelo con un solo clic y disfruta de los mejores programas de Tribuna TV, la televisión en sus manos.
Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Ahora empieza su programa, el show del Dr. Roy Aranda. Temas sobre los efectos que tiene la separación de los niños de sus padres, traumas que afrontan los indocumentados, violencia doméstica, el porqué de la violencia en las escuelas. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Good evening, my dear Tribuna TV viewers. Buenas noches, queridos televidentes. Today, del famoso show Tribuna TV. Today is my 46th show. Hoy es el show número 46. Cualquiera diría que ya estoy acostumbrado a saludarles sin errores. You think I'd be able to greet all of you without making any mistakes after 46 shows. Here we are. It's another show, another Thursday. Today is November 19. Hoy es noviembre 19. And we have, as usual, a show that I hope will be both interesting, informative, and useful. It does cover an important topic, namely the devastation of recent hurricanes. El tema de hoy son los huracanes horrorosos que hemos visto en Centroamérica recientemente y que han también invadido los Estados Unidos y otras partes del Caribe. So, sadly, it's an impossibility to escape coronavirus. There's just no way of avoiding COVID-19. No hay ninguna manera de evadir el coronavirus, because even when you're looking at the impact of hurricanes that you think has nothing to do with COVID-19, you'd be wrong, because you're having a hurricane in the midst of COVID-19. You know, it's not like you're having victims wearing their masks, keeping physical distancing, and rescuers keeping physical distancing. You know, they're going to shelters, they're going to hospitals, they're out in the street. You know, I mean, this is in the middle of a pandemic, so you don't escape it. We're in a new era. We're in an era, a COVID-19 era, and much of what we do, la mayoría de las cosas que vamos a hacer de ahora en adelante, we'll have to keep in mind keeping ourselves safe, guardándonos seguros y sanos y salvos a raíz de esta pandemia tan horrorosa that's claiming more and more casualties and deaths every day. I mean, it's really horrible. So without further ado, I would like to tell you that the show, the topic, the title, is the toll of hurricanes Delta, Zeta, and Eta. These are Greek letters. We ran out of the alphabet. What else, and how do we heal? In Spanish, it's approximately el impacto de los huracanes Delta, Zeta, y Eta. ¿Qué más? Y cómo sanar. What can we do to overcome the damage? I have an exciting guest, Dr. Denelia Rosa. I will introduce her shortly. She is a good friend. I've known her, about 10 or so years approximately? More or less?
Yeah.
Okay. And she's been a guest on the show before, and in fact, it was a topic not too dissimilar, but it related to the devastation in Puerto Rico because of the earthquakes that happened towards the end of December into January of this year. So I wanted to let you know that the show is being recorded live on YouTube, and by tomorrow, recordings will be available on the website of Tribuna TV, Vimeo, and other electronic platforms. So está grabado hoy el programa en YouTube y mañana estará disponible en las plataformas de Tribuna TV, Vimeo y seguramente otras plataformas de social media. Lo que también quería decirles es que vamos a hacer unos cuantos slides. I'm going to be showing several slides. So as I've done before, if you are interested in taking photographs of the slides, please do. Pueden sacar fotos. This is something that I do freely to the viewers. And alternatively, you can wait for a recording and then take screenshots. So sírvanse sacar fotos, o cuando salga el video pueden sacar las fotos directamente del video. So I wanted first just to introduce Dr. Denelia Rosa. Dr. Denelia Rosa, she's director of Dean Hope Center for Educational and Psychological Services, the training clinic at Teachers College, Columbia University. She obtained her clinical psychology degree at Derner Institute at Delphi University. Prior to her current job, she worked for 18 years throughout New York City in various clinical and educational settings, predominantly with children and families from diverse backgrounds. She's a founding member of the Health Psychology Rotation in the Bellevue NYU Internship Program, past president of New York Association of Hispanic Mental Health Professionals and New York State Psychological Association, the organization that I promote every time we have a show, and I'm a past president as well. Denelia was the first Latina president, and I'm the first Latino president, so I followed her footsteps 2 years later. You were 2014 and I was 2016. She recently completed a 3-year term as board member of the APA Board of Professional Affairs, recently appointed to the APA, American Psychological Association, I've also mentioned them on a regular basis, Commission of Accreditation for a 3-year term. So this is from January 2020 to December of 2022. At Teachers College, Dr. Rosa coordinates the practicum training for students of 5 graduate programs. She is a professor and a clinical supervisor for the clinical psychology program. She's a founding member of the Teachers College Psychological Emergency Response Team, which is pretty consistent, I guess, with one of the things we're doing, dealing with crises like hurricanes. And she supervises the clinical graduate students. She's the clinical director of the newly established Teachers College Resilience Center for veterans and their families. She's been invited to speak in radio and television and offers seminars on mental health issues with the Latino community. Recently, she was invited to become an associate editor for the new encyclopedia on death and dying by Macmillan. She's a recipient of the 2007 NISPA Service Award and the 2016 highly recognized Carl F. Heiser, APA, American Psychological Association, Presidential Award for Advocacy. She has a small-time private practice in Spanish, bilingual psychological, and psychoeducational evaluation. So, welcome, Dinelia.
Thank you.
So did I leave anything out that you need to mention, or was there anything incorrect in what I said?
That's fine. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
So, saludos a todos. If you want to just greet everybody, you want to say hello, saludar a los viewers. Do you have anything to say? Any
Oh, no,
greeting?
that's fine. I look forward to participating after you start the topic.
Okay. So, we're going to look at the introduction and dedication to the program. So, por favor, Oscar, y saludos de tu parte.
Hola, hola. Bienvenidos.
That's Oscar yelling in the background. I'm in the studio, and we are physically distanced by probably close to 20 feet. So, I don't think 6 feet's enough. So I've increased it. I made it more like 20 feet. So, puede poner el primer slide, por favor. Okay, so at the top you see the title. My name is host. Dr. Peter Canaris is a consultant who helps out with some of the ideas and review of the program content. And my guest, Dr. Dinelia Rosa. So as you can see, Hurricane Eta carved a path of destruction that devastated Central America as it made its way to the United States. I gave you a picture of the storm so you can see how huge it is. The toll stemming from the hurricane triad, Delta, Zeta, Eta, and others to follow, will form a coping disaster for millions and for years to come. There are huge numbers of people impacted directly. They were in the path of the storm, as well as family members and loved ones who were not in the direct path of the hurricanes, who nevertheless were affected in the United States and other countries because their loved ones were affected. Even as society faces dramatic losses daily and astronomically increasing rates of COVID-19 infections, breaking records on a daily basis, nature's fury comes in the size of a microscopic virus at one end of the spectrum, COVID, and attacks at the other end of the spectrum with unimaginably large hurricanes spanning up to 1,380 miles, the distance from New York to Dallas. That was a record, to typhoon tip. Hurricane Dorian, about the size of Georgia. Hurricane Michael, about the size of Colorado. Wind speeds as high as 190 miles per hour. Hurricane Camille. Loss of lives as high as 12,000. The Great Galveston Hurricane in Texas. Property damage over 160 billion. Hurricane Katrina. All of Puerto Rico was declared a federal disaster zone after Hurricane Maria hit in 2017. And here in New York, I'm in New York, Superstorm Sandy devastated New York and New Jersey in 2012, leaving in its wake $70 billion in damage. ¿Me puede poner el segundo slide? To continue, Mark Connolly, a UNICEF representative in Honduras, while speaking and being interviewed by CNN, he said recently, we're going to get a perfect storm or a Pandora's box of diseases that predominantly affect children. So if you think about it, if you are in devastated areas where you don't have access to cars, you don't have access to buses, to transportation, you're stuck, you don't have access to medical doctors, you don't have access to first aid, of course you're going to be exposed to diseases and a promulgation of diseases just because of rotting vegetation, deaths, and so forth. So children are going to be certainly exposed more. Furthermore, as I mentioned before, we're in a pandemic, so you have people that are dealing with these hurricanes in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, which just increases their exposure and their risk, not only to problems from the hurricane, but to contamination from COVID and other opportune diseases. This show will focus on the consequences of these natural disasters and coping strategies to help the millions of people affected. I'm dedicating the show to all who have suffered in the 2020 hurricane season, one for the record books. This indeed, we've surpassed every other year in terms of hurricanes. Hurricane Delta made landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula on October 7 as a Category 2 hurricane. Hurricane Zeta made landfall on the Yucatan Peninsula on October 26 as a Category 2 hurricane, and Eta made landfall in Bilwi, Nicaragua on November 3rd as a Category 4 hurricane. I gave you some photos there just so you can see. The top two are from Honduras, and the bottom one is actually from the United States, mainland United States, flooding in the mainland United States. So I did have some, puedes sacar a slide y just poner la cara de Dinelia. So Dinelia, I just wanted to run by a couple more statistics before we get into some of the symptoms and problems that people are experiencing when faced with a natural disaster like a hurricane. You have, for instance, this 2020, ¿se la puede poner la cara? Sí. The 2020 Atlantic hurricane season, the outlook called for as many as 25 storms, which is way, way higher than the previous one, than the previous record, more than double, the other historical averages. There have been 32 tropical depressions, 30 became storms, 12 became hurricanes, including 5 major hurricanes. The most recent one is Theta, which is already past Eta. Okay. Eta, I've already mentioned that it's a Category 4 hurricane. Just to give you some sense of what it did, it swallowed entire buildings, washed out roads. The early assessment found more than 2.5 million people in Central America were affected. 2.5 million. We had a second landfall over Cuba, November 8th. It brought over 12 inches of rain. Cuba already was saturated with rain from other systems. 25,000 people had to be evacuated. Officials in Cuba are reporting flooding from overflowing riverbanks and along coastal areas. Eta made landfall for a third time in the Florida Keys late November 8th, and a fourth landfall near Cedar Key, Florida on November 12th. Zeta, that was its precursor, October 26th, made landfall Well, it made landfall initially Yucatan, October 26th. It arrived in Louisiana on October 28th as a Category 2 storm and created havoc in Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia. The worst damage was 322,000 customers without power. This was the seventh storm to threaten Louisiana that has a history of getting these hurricanes, and the fifth to make landfall in 2020. And the precursor to that one, Delta, made landfall as a Hurricane 2 on October 7th, and that was in Yucatan. It reached Louisiana in early October 9th, the second hurricane landfall in that region at that point in time, and sixth tropical storm to make landfall in Louisiana. So as of November 12th, applications because of Hurricane Delta and others have been approved for approximately 11.6 million. So Dinelia, ¿qué te parece todo? What do you think? I tend to speak to her often in Spanish. I've noticed that. What do you think about all this that's going on with these hurricanes and this devastation?
This is a very sad that it's not only the intensity of the events, but also the frequency of how many are happening at the same time and the short gap between each one of them. So people don't have hardly any time to recuperate from one event to then go through a second one, a third, and a fourth. And people are strong, but it gets to a point where the drop keeps going on, and it creates a hole. And I think that it starts affecting people emotionally, particularly when it hits areas that are very low socioeconomic status, very poor, that they have very little to begin with, and they lose whatever they have left through this natural disasters. This has been very hard for the countries in Central America in particular. And what it creates is some difficulty sleeping. And these are normal symptoms that people will feel when they're going through some experience like this. Difficulty sleeping, a level of anxiety, worrisome behavior, what's going to happen next. But when so many events are occurring one after the other, then those symptoms could become more intensified. And people can experience some of that. The sense of loss also creates symptoms of depression, which are different from anxiety, right? So the sense of loss not only of your family members, friends, people that you know, but also property that has been accumulated with a lot of effort, a lot of work, and so easily goes away. So, and then to rebuild is so hard, particularly families with children. So that creates a sense of loss and symptoms of depression, sadness, hopelessness, some kind of worry, how I'm going to get where I was, so how I'm going to get what I need. So it's hard. It's very hard.
I want to pick up on one of the things that you said. We're having, with some suggestions, some comments that I think are probably applicable. You're talking about the frequency of it. We saw that in Puerto Rico when we went from Irma to Maria, which Irma already devastated the island, and Maria was the couple of exclamation points that finished devastating the island. And what was that, a separation of about 9 days, something like that, if memory serves me? It was maybe 9 days apart. So we're seeing a confluence of one hurricane after another. So two comments, though, is that we're looking at statistics. I'm giving you fairly as recent statistics as I'm able to come up with. But since we're looking at one hurricane after another, and several areas that are similar areas or close by areas were hit, there's no reason in my mind to consider that somebody who is already traumatized or physically sick or having some sort of reactions from one hurricane, time goes by, we're not going to see additional statistics. It's bound to increase. We're bound to see more damage and more devastation and greater toll in terms of bills on rebuilding the infrastructure as well as taking to the mental health, addressing mental health, emotional needs. The other piece that I'm wondering is to what extent, since we're talking about 2020 being a record setting, and I know from looking at the news that we have the ice cap is slowly melting away. We're seeing chunks of ice at the size of states going into the water and climate change. To what extent do you think that at least some of this it is in fact related to climate change? And, is the verdict going to be we're going to get more of this until and unless we start taking a closer look at what to do to protect the climate?
Well, I believe in science, and science is letting us know that the globe is warming up. So I tend to believe that some of these things that are happening, the frequency and the intensity, those two elements, that we probably will have an intense hurricane maybe every 50 years, every 60 years. But now we're having intense hurricanes, intense natural disasters, like even the fires on the West Coast, much more intense than it used to be before. And I think that contributing factor to that is the climate change.
Yeah, the thing is really affecting us all. I want to pick up on some of the symptoms. I'm going to put up a slide and then I'm going to take it down so that we can just focus on some of the symptoms. Oscar, ¿me puede poner por favor el 3, número 3? So for the viewers, I'm putting up slides, but then I'm going to, quickly take them down. So I suggest that you take a photograph of the slide if you wish, or screenshot as soon as we have the recording. I just wanted to give you a sense of the prevalence of some of these disorders. So I have some data following Superstorm Sandy, 2012 here in New York. More than 20% reported PTSD. We've talked about post-traumatic stress disorder on the show before. About one-third reported feeling depression, and almost half, 46%, reported anxiety. And Danelli, you were talking about some of the symptoms. These are typical symptoms. It's not necessarily, I haven't necessarily put down every imaginable symptom here. I've given you a variety of what I think are the most prevalent kinds of reactions that adults will display. Intrusive thoughts and flashbacks. This is characteristic of PTSD, where you think about the trauma over and over again, and you may have images of it with your eyes closed, or you may hear the sounds with your eyes closed. You may have like a flashback that you hear the wind, or you hear crashing sounds of trees banging into glass, or breakage of concrete, or the rushing of water. These would be flashbacks. Nightmares. The nightmares may or may not be related to what you experienced. Intense distress when reminded of the trauma. So you see photos, you see pictures, you see something in the news, or somebody mentions the hurricane or the disaster to you, and you start feeling very stressed. Loss of interest in activities. You just become more apathetic, more withdrawn. You're not that motivated or interested in doing things. Sleep disturbance. This is very common, very typical. You easily get startled. Any little noise, all of a sudden, you'll jump up. You'll be ready, almost ready for action, ready to escape if you have to. Feeling guilty. You might feel guilty for any of a number of reasons. You didn't do enough to protect yourself or your family. You didn't do enough to get out of the way soon enough. For whatever reason, you think that you failed in some way or another, and you're blaming yourself because of it. Depression. And what's called Katrina brain. I thought that I would throw that in because it's a very interesting concept. But even years after Katrina, people are reporting short-term memory loss and cognitive impairment. So there's something to be said that stress affects our brain. And by affecting our brain, it does target things such as our memory and cognitive capacity. Puedes sacar a slide.
Can I add one more to
Sure,
this list?
by all means, take it away. I wanted you to comment on this.
Yes. Something that I don't see in the list, and it's very important as well, is a change in mood. So people could get very snappy, very irritable, jumping at whatever comment in a bothered way. Like everything around them bothers them. And that starts affecting interpersonal relationship with their loved ones.
So it's the increased irritability, the mood changes. I wanted purposely to stay away from formal diagnoses because I wanted the viewers to understand that having some of these symptoms doesn't mean that you have this diagnostic category.
That's right.
In DSM-5 or in some sort of a classification, and that for whatever reason people are going to look at you as having a mental illness or having some sort of an emotional problem. These are typical symptoms. There are more serious consequences, and that people who may have these things to a greater degree and satisfy other categories, other requirements, might have a diagnosable disorder. But I really wanted to address the viewers. Certainly, people who've been in the path of the hurricane, you're going to experience something. You're going to have anxiety, depression. You're going to have problems with sleep. These are all typical, normal kinds of reactions, and you don't have to have a formal diagnosis to recognize this. I just wanted the viewers to be aware of it. These are typical, normal, and it's not, I didn't necessarily cover everything that's possible. Children, for instance, may have problems in school. They'll have problems focusing their attention in school. They may not want to go to school, even though now a lot of children are doing schooling virtually. They may not focus. They'll lose their concentration. They'll become distracted. Those that are going to school may zone out. You may see behavioral kinds of changes, and that's not just children, but with adults as well, becoming increasingly isolated, problems at home. And if you're in the midst of a coronavirus crisis, and you're also dealing with things like worrying about your family. I know that you experienced some tragedy in Puerto Rico, as did my family in Puerto Rico. But this was prior to COVID-19. I can only imagine now what it would be like having to think about like a disaster, another disaster for a loved one of mine. And especially during a pandemic. I mentioned children, so I wanted to put up a slide. Ponme cuatro. These are some symptoms that children will display, and I'm going to show it and then take it down in Denelia, since I know that you've done a lot of work in the area, not only of adults but with children, to talk from your experience. What are some of the things that you've seen? So in children, you see things like separation anxiety. They don't want to leave their parents. They're afraid of going away from mommy or daddy. Regression. Regression means that they start acting like they're younger. You have an older child now, maybe behaving, acting, talking somewhat younger. Child insisting on having the light on before going to the bathroom or before going to sleep. Some kinds of behaviors that a younger version of that child is now manifesting. Fear of the dark. Afraid that something bad is going to happen. Don't forget, you're in the midst of a hurricane, power goes out. So fear of the dark, fear of sleeping alone. Who is going to be there to help you, to protect you, to shelter you, to harbor you? The behavioral changes that I was talking about, increased isolation. It could be more aggressive behaviors, behavioral acting out. So there's different kinds of behavioral changes. Mood changes, quickly going from being maybe relatively okay, and then you say something, and then all of a sudden you get a snappy response, or you go happy, and then all of a sudden, moments later, anxiety or depression. So these ups and downs emotionally. Enuresis, you'll see children making in their beds more than before. So even if they had accidents before, you're seeing it more often now. Physical complaints, very, very common. Stomach aches, headaches, vague complaints. Mommy, I don't feel well. Daddy, I don't feel well. I don't want to go to school. I just don't feel right. And the changes in school performance, like I mentioned before. Oscar, por favor, puedes sacar el slide. So, Dinelli, anything to add? And because I know you've worked with children.
Yes, thank you. I would like to add another group, which is the group that is here in the United States of families and children of that come from the countries that are suffering right now. Some of the symptoms could be also experienced with the people that are in this country, right? That have the loved ones there, and they might feel helpless, hopeless, wanting to help and not being able to, maybe wanting to go to help the parents or extended family, and because of the COVID, now there is another barrier there. And then the children of families that are here, before I talk about the children, it's also the desire of wanting to help by sending something to the families, right, to help. And because you're one step removed from where the crisis is occurring, doesn't exempt you from experiencing some of the symptoms, because it's about your motherland, and it's about the people that you love and you care for, which is one of the challenges of immigrants, right? That we're here, we're helping our families in our countries, and when they're going through some crisis like this, we would like to do even more in helping them. And the children, which was the second part I was going to talk about, the children of the families that are here in the United States also experience emotional reactions, because once they see their families, their mother worry because of what's happening in their country, they probably are wondering what's going on. There's a sense of uncertainty. If they're a grown up, they could ask to the parent, what's going on in Honduras? What's happening in Guatemala? And the parents can explain to them. But if they're little children, they probably don't have an understanding of what's happening. Why mommy looks so worried? Why daddy looks so worried? Or why they're crying? So they could also experience some sense of uncertainty. So it is very important that the families try to explain in the most simple way possible what is happening in the country, to help the children contextualize what's going on.
How much consumption of photographs, news, visual imagery, is it acceptable to expose children to? I mean, I remember 9/11, that people saw the towers collapsing every 30 seconds. I mean, it was in the, again, I may be exaggerating, but it was in the news over and over and over and over and over and over again, every day. I mean, we saw the towers collapsing. I can't begin to tell you, probably 1,000 times I saw those towers collapsing. And I'm an adult, I know what I was watching, and it did have a profound impact on me. But, children watching these images, and unfortunately, some of these images, you're seeing cars underwater, children floating like on a raft. It's horrible when you see the image of that father and daughter who are trying to cross into the United States. You probably know which one I'm talking about. And they crossed the Rio Grande, and the father and daughter both drowned. And the bodies were recovered on the United States side, and photographers were sitting there taking photos, and it was plastered all over the news. That's horrible, or to see children caged up in where they're being held at the border, at the United States-Mexico border. Should children be exposed to some of this? Should they watch it with the parent? Should the parent monitor or turn off the TV? And of course, some of this has to do with the age of the child. Older children obviously have different cognitive abilities than like 5, 6, 7, or 8-year-olds. What are your thoughts about that?
So you're absolutely right. The recommendation is to try to stay away from intense news, and this goes to adults too, particularly if the adults already are experiencing a sense of worrisome behavior. You don't want to be exposed too much to the media, right? So with children, the rule of thumb is it depends of their age, it depends of their level of understanding, and parents know best about that, about how much they want to expose children to looking at the media, because we know that the media tries to be sensationalist, right? So they're probably gonna show the worst scenarios. And your question is, do you want your child to see this, or do you want your child to see some of it? I like to think that it depends on the age of the child, the level of communication that the child has, and the emotional stability of the child. You could have a child of 10 or 12 years old that probably is very sensitive, absorbs things from the environment very easily, and probably you want to not expose that child as much as somebody that probably has the same age and tends to be a little bit more strong emotionally and probably could take in some of that information. It all depends, it fluctuates, and it depends of the parents and how much they know their child and how much that child could take or not take. The challenge for parents is when they have children from different ages, right? So they have a 3-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 12-year-old. Obviously, those 3 ages are different developmentally, and the exposure will vary between one and the other, and that's when it becomes challenging to the parents. If the family's sharing together, how do you control that? That's where it could become a little tricky for parents.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we get into coping, talking about what are some of the strategies that parents with children can do just in terms of breaking this kind of news. So let's take a look. In fact, let's take a look at the last slide that I have on the topic, which is coping, coping strategies. Oscar, por favor, slide número 6. And then I have a nice slide after that that's really a slide full of hope. I just, it puts a smile on my face every time. No, it's like, no, my God, you did it too soon.
Number 5?
Cinco.
Okay.
Okay, everybody ignore the last one. We'll put it up later. That was my surprise. It will be a little bit later. What are some coping strategies? Again, this is like a listing of some things. It's not necessarily covering everything in the spectrum of things that psychologists and mental health professionals do, or grief counselors or clerics. Grieving and mourning. Crying can be an emotional release. Talk about it. What's your support system? Healthy eating. Avoid alcohol and substances. Obviously, you don't have to completely stop alcohol, but really excessive alcohol and substances. There's really no role for substances. Period. Avoid excessive caffeine; it'll wire you. Rest. You have to get enough sleep. Your body has to rest. Your brain has to rest. Your muscles have to rest. Exercise. You've got to get some movement, some mobility. You have to establish routines. Get back to routines you used to have, or if for some reason you're not able to because you've moved, you've relocated, you're somewhere else, you have to get into new routines. You have to have a set of routines that you can depend on and count on a regular basis. Pleasurable activities. What did you like to do? What do you like to do? What can you do now realistically, given your situation and your circumstances? What's available to you? What's there? What kinds of hobbies are available that you could pick up where you left off, or renew or pick up new kinds of things that you didn't used to do. Spirituality, for those who have religious beliefs, certainly you know what I'm talking about. This is obviously important for many people. For those who don't, well, you have your beliefs, and that's fine. I just wanted to put that out for the people who do have these kinds of beliefs and rely on them for support and for coping. Relaxation techniques. We've talked about this before on the show. Deep breathing relaxation exercises. I think we've done demonstrations where you inhale deeply through the nose, hold it for a second, and it comes out the mouth. There's a muscle relaxation exercise that Peter talked about, Dr. Canaris talked about last time, where you alternately tense up, tighten up a muscle, and then you relax the muscle, and you go through all the major muscle groups of the body. Meditation. You can repeat a word, Om, or some sort of a word, or you can count to 10, count again to 10. The idea is you're focusing on something, and that has an effect of relaxing your body and your brain and your body. You're relaxing your muscles, you're relaxing emotionally, and you're relaxing physically and cognitively, your mental faculties, you're relaxing the brain. And if necessary, you have to seek professional help when you need more help. And sometimes, unfortunately, people, they don't recognize that they need more help, but there may be others around you who do. And it's up to them somehow to try to stimulate them or encourage them. There are times that really you do need to seek something above and beyond family, loved ones, cleric, other sources of access to you and your support group. May not be enough. And there's some telltale signs. When you're very, very depressed, you don't get out of bed, or you're engaging in behavior aggressive, you're driving like a lunatic out there, you're starting to experiment taking more drugs, drinking more alcohol, overeating, you give up on your appearance. These are some telltale signs that things are really going bad. You're arguing more with your spouse if you have one. You're close to domestic violence at home. These are telltale signs that you need additional help. Puede sacar el slide. So, Denelia, there's a lot there to chew on. Denelia, there's a lot there to chew on. So I wanted to ask you, like I said, that grieving and mourning, crying can be an emotional release. People think, you're crying because you're depressed. Can you cry as a way of relieving your emotional stress? Is crying okay?
Yes, what I like about this list is that it taps on the three dimensions of us human beings: mind, body, and spirit, right? So the mind is how do we keep our mental state in the most positive way possible, right? So you're giving some examples of how we take care of our mind with meditation, relaxation techniques are very highly recommended to keep the mind calm. Then the body, which is the other dimension, you're talking about eating well, not abusing ourselves with alcohol or any other kind of substances, doing exercises, which is very good for the physical part. And then you talk about the spirit, right? The spirituality part, which is the connection with something higher than us, whatever that is. For some people it's God, from other people it's Allah, from other people it's something else. But there is an entity out there that we revere and respect as being higher than us. It could be nature, by the way. And that feeds our spirit in a different level than our mind and our body. And I think that when we want to take care of ourselves in a crisis like this, we want to keep track of those three, mind, body, and soul. And the good sleep also is part of that. Physical, our body needs to replenish energies and That's why we need to sleep and good hours, right? So always keep in mind, what am I doing for my mind? What am I doing for my body? And what am I doing for my soul?
How important is it to talk to others?
Talk.
To talk about how you feel to other people. How important is it?
It is very important because we humans, which is that actually that's the one aspect that makes us different from other from animals, right? Is that we have the skill, the ability to communicate, and when we use it well, it helps not only our physical but our spirit and our mind. I mean, it's food for the spirit when we can talk to other people. But one of the challenges is that we need to feel that we are talking to the right person, and that brings factors such as, do I trust these people to talk about this? Do I feel that I could open up with this other person? Because of course there's mistrust, and there's people that have failed us in one way or the other, and that makes us close up and not want to talk. When we don't talk, we contain everything that we have inside us, and that could become toxic
This,
for us.
this point is very important. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit more because I have many patients who've had, they're not necessarily victims of a hurricane, but they've been victims of severe occupational injuries, amputations, deformations, and they are very they're very self-conscious. They're very concerned when they go to a place where people that they used to have contact with are looking at them. They probably are. I mean, it's a reality. They probably are being looked at. But they're concerned when they get asked questions, what happened to you? You look fine. Things like that. And for viewers, I think it's really important to understand that, sometimes speaking to a traumatized person is an art form in and of itself, and not saying anything may be the appropriate thing to do, giving a little bit of distance, or just saying, like, I'm here for you if you'd like to talk. I don't think that somebody who's traumatized really wants to hear, I know what you're going through, because they don't know. They do not know what you're going through. So I really think that that's an awful way to start a conversation. I've been there, I know what you're
Absolutely.
going through. So I think that the shoe fits, both ways. So for people to, I guess, as you were saying, know who they're talking to, and perhaps maybe be more comfortable in sharing an experience with somebody they're close to, not necessarily a whole group of people, but one person that they're comfortable with. And it
Right.
probably takes time. There's like a mourning that they're going through, and they, maybe a week, 2 weeks, they may need some time to come out and say it. And the viewer, the person who's on the receiving end of this, has to acknowledge it and recognize it. And otherwise, others that are casual bystanders, or they know the person, the smart thing to do is, maybe say nothing and not stare, not dwell, say nothing, and just wait.
Absolutely. Very, very, I totally agree with you.
So the support system is something, obviously, that's very important. What happens during a COVID-19 life in terms of a support system when you have maybe a family? You may have a nuclear family. There may be spouse, husband, wife, or spouse and co-spouse, or partners that are together, one or more children, or there may be a brother or sister in there. You may have like a nuclear family, but you also have like a family that's just physically not there. They're not there because of the pandemic. You also may have people that are completely isolated. A person who is completely living alone. Somebody lives alone, rents a room, and the only contact he or she has is in the distance with family, maybe in Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, or maybe no family. So how do you deal with that support system when it's necessary during something like a virus, during this pandemic?
Well, one of the things that we are using more than ever is the remote virtual connections. And for us Latino, this is a big challenge, more probably than any other cultures, because I will say maybe, let me expand it a little bit and say any culture that is collective, has the collective orientation, will be experiencing a lot of stress having to connect with your loved ones remotely. But this is what is kind of saving us around this time of the pandemic, where the emphasis is to stay home and quarantine. But through this connection, we still are able to see our loved ones, talk to our loved ones, and be in connection. Um, I know families that every Friday night they spend 2 hours connected online, socializing. Like something they will do probably in the weekend, face to face, but because they cannot do it, they're doing it online. And the same thing with the health services. I mean, I'm sure that the audience already have experienced medical visits through telehealth, um, and, um, and the same with psychological services. The challenge, I think, through this is that we don't know to what extent the family that is in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and Honduras, for example, have the devices to be able to connect with the family remotely and virtually.
Especially now.
So that is a big challenge. That's a big barrier that probably makes the anguish, right, even bigger, not being able to connect with them, even in the most simple way, which is through a Zoom or a remote image.
For people who don't have a support system like a family or friends, relatives, loved ones, etc., people in the community, there are things that can be done. There are groups of people who may have suffered something similar, like a head injury group, for instance. And they're able to come together through Zoom, and this becomes like a surrogate family, and that you can do this in many ways for people who've had maybe substance use problems or alcohol problems.
Yes.
These are some things that can be done. That this becomes like a surrogate family. It's there, and I didn't mention before. But I have to put it out there. But and I know you'll agree with me. I am an absolute adorer of pets. I mean, I'm a pet lover, and I have many patients presently now, not victims of hurricanes, but occupational injuries who live alone. They're isolated. I have one patient who has a lot of medical issues, a lot of problems. And he got a little dog. He found a dog. The dog was abandoned. He checked to see if it was microchipped. It wasn't. He kept the dog. The dog, he says, is like lightning speed, so he called the dog Speedy. Speedy is this man's baby, is this man's love. He's isolated. He's alone. He's got therapy with me, teletherapy. He's doing his sessions with other professionals. His family is little Speedy. So, suggestion for people, I'm not, not everybody's necessarily a pet lover, but I know that during the pandemic, and I've talked about it before, rates of adoptions increased, they skyrocketed because people really felt that they wanted to embrace the love of an animal. So that's food for thought, just something to keep in mind. Also, people who were in harm's way in hurricanes and all that in Puerto Rico, they did not want to leave their pets behind. That was like, es mi familia, it's my family. You're not going to make me leave my family behind. So I did want to mention that. And in terms of the children, getting back to that, I did want to suggest that it might be, and I want your opinion on this, it might be good for a family to have like a, like a dinner or a lunch, a get-together where they share over a meal the tragedy that happened and to whatever extent their family or peers were affected, and they talk about it, and they talk about it openly to the children that are there without the imagery, without so much of the imagery. So that might be a good thing, having like a meal and an opportunity to talk about that. Does that strategy like that make sense to you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All righty. Wow. So time flies. I'm getting the evil eye by Oscar. When Oscar gives me the evil eye, it tells me that we have to move on. So let me just let me show the viewers the last two slides. Vamos a acabar ahora. Slide 6, and then we'll get into resources. Denelli, I think you saw this once before.
Yes.
Slide 6, y de ahí vamos
I love the slide.
I was so filled with like joy and happiness when I saw this that I had to share it with the viewers. This is a white dove. A white dove is a symbol of hope. This white dove spent 2 hours on the roof of the brother's house of a friend of mine who lives here, and her brother was devastated in Puerto Rico the morning after an earthquake. This was January of this year. And the brother said that he felt like it was an angel hovering over his roof. And I just wanted to share that because there's always hope. There's always something positive. That's why I wanted to leave this photo as the last photo, which is a photo of something beautiful, of life, of hope. Y por favor, dame la última página, which is resources. Just briefly, we've gone through this before. You know how to reach me. You know how to reach Dr. Canaris. New York State Psychological Association. I've mentioned them on a regular basis. I've given you a phone number and a website. They're the main psychological association of New York State. Feel free to contact them if you have any issue that you'd like to look at. They have a website. They have all sorts of things that are available educationally for the public. American Psychological Association, which is the biggie. This is the one that I was mentioning that Danelia was very actively involved in. I've given you their phone number and website. They also have an incredible number of resources. Just search it. You'll see it. It's incredible what they have. Suffolk County Psychological Association. This is sort of like my homeroom because I live in Long Island, and they are a wonderful small little association, but they're so incredible with the number of resources and training that they provide. Every state has a psychological association. The provinces do. Puede sacar el slide. Danelia, did you want to say anything to the viewers about how they can contact you if they need to, or any parting comments before we end the show?
Sure, I could be reached, Dinelia Rosa. I could be reached through the New York State Psychological Association, which the information is there already.
Okay. Any last remarks to the viewers?
Thank you for viewing the program. Thank you for wanting to hear our humble knowledge with you. And we hope that you continue watching the shows and subsequent shows.
So, to the viewers, I did want to once again, gracias. Dinelio, muchas gracias. You have to admit I behaved myself pretty well speaking mostly in English because I tend to switch over to Spanish so often with you. It's become an automatic.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Become an automatic thing. So,
yes.
so doing it in English was a little bit more unusual. But I did want to thank the viewers for watching the show, and those who were not able to, it's certainly going to be available as a recording, again, by tomorrow. It's being recorded YouTube. It'll be available on Tribuna TV's website, Vimeo, other platforms and social media. What I really, the main emphasis that I wanted to put across is that, we have these issues that come up. Life is life, life gives us whatever it gives us, nos da problemas, it gives us problems. It also gives us tools. It gives us ways of trying to cope with these things. We didn't focus on some of the logical first steps of what to do in the event that a hurricane, if a hurricane's heading towards you and you know about it, you have to watch the news. You have to stay on top of these things. Listen to the news. If they're asking you to evacuate, make plans to evacuate. These are some things that I didn't bring up in the show, but it's logical. If you have to mobilize yourself, that's the time to do it. If you have pets, that's the time to think about them. If you have sick people living with you, or you're worrying about sick people, that's the time to do it before the hurricane hits. What we were covering today is after the fact. How are you recovering now in the path of the hurricanes? The devastation has happened. So I really hope that the viewers get something from it. I've always emphasized to the viewers, you have to be each other's keeper. You have to be hermano y hermana, brother and sister to your neighbors, to everybody. If you don't see somebody for a period of time, or they seem to have disappeared, or the car hasn't moved, check in on them. Pick up the phone, call. Now it's so easy with the smartphones and Zoom and all, and FaceTime. I mean, there's so many things you can do. WhatsApp. I mean, it's amazing the type of contact you can do. But don't feel isolated. Don't be neglectful of people in your community. Recognize that there are problems. We always have solutions. You may not be happy. You may not be happy with the outcome. You may not be happy with the solution. But having some solutions, having a solution is better than having no solution. When you have no solution, you give up, you throw your arms up in the air, and that's default. All that does is it just gets you more depression. You don't care. You become unmotivated, and I don't accept that. I've told you before, you can't control the rain, but you can control yourself, your behavior, carrying an umbrella. You always have to find your tools, whatever your tools are. Whatever situation is problematic for you, is difficult for you, there's always going to be tools. Don Oscar, ¿tienes algo para despedirte?
Bendiciones.
That's it?
Yeah.
Oh my God, bendiciones, oh my God. So to all of you, I'm going to have 2 more shows in December. One of them should be dealing with communications issues between parents and their older teens and older adult children. And the last show of December, the last show of 2020, will be coping with holiday depression, coping with the holiday blues during a pandemic. This is going to be the first time that we're going to have Thanksgiving pretty much at home, Christmas at home. What are you going to do with that turkey? What are you going to do with all the people? It's different. We're dealing with a very different situation. And it's already a difficult enough and trying time of the year for a lot of people. It's bound to be even that more difficult. So we will talk about that. That will be the last show of 2020. So, saludos a todos. Me despido. Denelia, thank you so much for being a guest.
You're
Oscar,
welcome.
muchas gracias. Emilio, allá, the director, and Ezequiel, who's the producer in El Salvador, and I keep telling him to send me pupusas. Y nunca me las manda. I give up. I'm going to have to go out and get my own pupusas. So good night, everybody, and be safe outside, and watch out for each other. Buenas noches a todos. Good night.
Buenas noches.